The newsroom lights flickered slightly as the sound of incoming alerts echoed off the glass walls. It was just past 6 a.m. in Washington, but no one was sipping coffee or chatting casually. Every journalist in the room was glued to a screen, eyes wide, fingers flying across keyboards. A document had just been leaked, a 2-page hotel receipt from Kyiv. The total, $400,000 for 2 nights. The name on the reservation, Senator Lindsey Graham. Within minutes, it was the lead headline on every major network. $400,000 hotel scandal rocks Senate. Flashed across cable news tickers. On social media, the hashtag #GrahamGate was already trending in every U.S. time zone. Reporters barked questions over phone calls. Is this verified? Do we know which hotel? Was he alone? South Carolina voters, many of them, longtime supporters of Graham, flooded local radio lines and Facebook Live shows with fury. He took our money overseas and lived like a king, one man shouted on air. I defended that man for years. Senator Graham, caught off guard, issued a short press release through his office. The senator's recent travel to Kyiv was conducted within protocol. Allegations of misuse of funds are politically motivated and false. No apology. No explanation. Just silence wrapped in legal language. That silence only added fuel to the fire. Elsewhere in the city, inside a secured office tucked away in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, Kash Patel sat across from 2 senior intelligence officers. A red folder sat between them. It had no label, just a gold seal on the front. This came in through an interagency channel this morning, one of the officers said, pushing it toward him. We were told it had to go to you. Directly, Kash didn't speak. He just opened it slowly. Inside were 2 things. A copy of the same hotel receipt the press had obtained on a second document no one in the media had yet seen. It was a SWIFT banking transaction log, partially redacted but still readable. It showed a wire transfer, sent from a Latvian shell bank to a Kyiv holding company. The recipient account matched the hotel's banking number. The sender, a shell firm linked to a U.S. defense contractor based in Virginia. There was one more thing, a digital tag attached. To the log, Operation Revival. Kash leaned back in his chair. He recognized the name. Revival had appeared in a report months ago buried inside a declassified NATO cable. Back then, it had referred to a post-conflict economic alignment strategy in Eastern Europe. But this was something else entirely. You're sure this didn't come from the press? Kash asked. The officer shook his head. It's not public yet. Only 3 people outside this room know. Kash's fingers drummed on the table. Then the leak was deliberate. Or, the second officer said, someone wants it to become public. But they want you to find the rest. He left the building quietly, clutching the red folder like it was radioactive. Outside, the sky was steel gray. Thunder rolled low in the distance. Not a storm, but the kind of atmospheric pressure that made everything feel heavier. By noon, Graham had canceled a scheduled appearance on Capitol Hill. His press secretary avoided cameras, offering only a written statement. Senator Graham has no further comment. Meanwhile, Patel made his way to an underground cybersecurity vault near Arlington, a place where sensitive files could be cross-checked against global databases. He fed the wire log into a private system, waiting as AI scanned through millions of historical entries. One match, one result. The Latvian shell company had appeared before in a now-buried 2019 Pentagon report. Flagged for suspicious, the rain started falling just as Kash Patel exited the Arlington security vault. Drops tapped softly against his coat, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing. The AI scan had confirmed it. Operation Revival wasn't new. It had roots deep within a forgotten Pentagon inquiry, long ago sealed under national security pretense. And Lindsey Graham's hotel bill in Kyiv wasn't just excessive, it was a breadcrumb leading straight into a covert money loop involving defense contractors, foreign lobbying, and possibly worse, He stepped into his black SUV and dialed a secure line. "Put me through to Director Hensley at the Treasury's Financial Crimes Division," he said flatly. A long pause, then a click. "This is Hensley." Kash didn't waste time. "I need all flag transactions tied to Petrex systems between 2018 and now." There was a beat of silence. "Petrex. That's black tier. You sure you want that heat?" "It's already burning," Kash replied, "and Graham's about to be the first one scorched." By the time he reached his office inside the newly formed Congressional Ethics Task Force unit many called the Shadow Doge, he found two more files waiting. One was from an anonymous whistleblower. It contained flight logs showing Graham had traveled not only to Kyiv, but also to Warsaw and Tbilisi in the same 48-hour window. All billed to the same firm listed in the Latvian transfer. The second was worse. Grainy CCTV stills from a Kyiv lobby, time-stamped just hours after the $400,000 hotel charge. The man in the images wasn't alone. He was shaking hands with a known fixer, someone already on a State Department watch list for back-channel arms deals. Kash stared at the images in silence. Outside, the rain turned into a storm. Crosstown. Lindsey Graham was pacing inside a private residence far from Capitol Hill. Phones were off, curtains drawn. He knew the press would soon dig deeper. The hotel receipt was just the beginning. It's what Kash had. Whatever it was wouldn't stay in the shadows for long. His advisor, Thomas, leaned in close. "We need to kill this story." "We still have pull with one of the networks. We can spin this." Graham's face darkened. "You think this is about a damn hotel bill? That man Patel he doesn't leak unless he's already won?" Thomas hesitated. "So what do we do?" There was a long silence. Then Graham whispered, "We pray he doesn't find Latvia." But it was already too late. At CNN's Situation Room, host Erin Moore received a USB drive in a plain envelope, with no return address. Her producer inserted it into an air-gapped system. On it was a compressed folder labeled LV Fed Revival. Inside, transfer documents, passport scans, satellite imagery, and one explosive internal memo. The memo was from a Petrex executive to a senior U.S. senator named, but the signature was partially visible. It ended with a chilling sentence. "Revival is on track. Final payout secured. Kyiv is cleared." Moore stared at the screen. This is money laundering for a defense pipeline," she whispered. "Worse," her producer replied. "It's domestic manipulation disguised as foreign aid." Meanwhile, J.D. Vance, seated quietly in the West Wing Secure Communications Center, watched the unraveling play out on an internal feed. The vice president had been briefed just hours ago. He was told the scandal could destabilize not just Graham, but several major figures connected to foreign policy and defense committees. He turned to his aide. "Get me Patel." Within the hour, Kash's encrypted line buzzed. "This is Vance," the voice said. "I need you in this situation. Room tonight." Kash didn't flinch. "Does the president know?" A pause. Then, "Not yet." As night fell over Washington, the city pulsed with a quiet dread. The headlines were multiplying. Anonymous sources confirmed a second investigation. A private charter linked to Graham had landed in Baku 6 months ago. Another unreported trip. Kash Patel sat at his desk, red folder open, whistleblower tips lining the wall behind him like a detective's crime map. Everything pointed to a single horrifying truth. Operation Revival wasn't just a misused name or a misfiled transaction. It was a covert geopolitical operation designed to profit from Chaos One that Lindsey Graham didn't just know about. He helped design it. The next morning, Washington woke up to a political firestorm. Major outlets, CNN, Al Jazeera, and even Fox News, were flashing the same image across every screen. Lindsey Graham shaking hands with Roman Vitsenko, Ukrainian businessman, accused in a 2021 classified NATO arms diversion probe. That handshake, grainy and underlit, was now the symbol of a brewing scandal that could explode into a global crisis. Inside the Capitol, murmurs ran through every corridor. Democrats demanded an emergency ethics review. Publicans remained uncomfortably silent. But behind closed doors, several began to distance themselves from Graham. The whispers turned sharper. Was he selling influence or something worse? Kash Patel entered the Senate Oversight Chamber just after 10 a.m., clutching a red-flagged binder, stamped high-sensitive domestic assets. He paused at the doorway before stepping onto the floor. Reporters craned their necks from the gallery. This wasn't just about Graham anymore. The press had gotten wind that other senators may be named in the Petrex documents. J.D. Vance watched the scene unfold from the White House Situation Room, his jaw tight. He had reviewed the documents at 3 a.m. with his chief of staff and 2 national security aides. The Petrex funding network didn't stop at Latvia. It extended into Estonia, Georgia, and even parts of South Sudan nations where American defense contractors had quietly begun operations under vague development contracts. Now the stakes were rising by the hour. The Petrex trail proved, connected to policy decisions or aid votes, the public outcry would be nuclear. In a hastily arranged press conference, Senator Graham finally emerged. His face, tired but defiant, met a wall of flashbulbs. "I have never and will never trade American policy for money," he said. This smear campaign, led by political operatives like Mr. Patel, is just that, a smear. But his voice wavered at the end. And that brief crack didn't go unnoticed. Kash, watching from the chamber side exit, turned to his aide. "He's bluffing. He knows we have more." He tapped the folder. "It's time to go live." Within 2 hours, Kash Patel sat across from CNN anchor Aaron Moore for a special interview titled The Revival Papers: What Congress Doesn't Want You to See. The lights dimmed, cameras rolled. The broadcast was carried simultaneously on over 200 channels across the world. "What you're about to show us," Moore began cautiously, "is tied to sitting members of the United States Senate." Kash nodded once, and former cabinet officials. He opened the folder. The first document showed a Petrex contract, signed in early 2022, proving consulting fees for confidential briefings to Senate staffers on Eastern European defense positioning. This, Patel said, wasn't consulting, was scripting votes in advance. The second, a Latvian bank ledger. Under a line labeled Client 7A, Phoenix, USA, it listed a $1.8 million transfer. Time-stamped 1 week before the Senate passed a controversial aid bill to Ukraine. Moore leaned forward. "Do we know who Phoenix is?" Kash hesitated. "The trail ends at a P.O. box in Charleston, South Carolina." And a voice call routing number assigned to Senator Graham's former campaign treasurer. The room fell silent. Back in the Capitol, Graham's team scrambled. Phones rang off the hook. His press advisor shoved a tablet across the table. "He's naming you. Patel's naming you. You have to respond." Graham didn't blink. Instead, he whispered, "Tell Kennedy to stay silent. If he breaks ranks, we all fall." But Senator John Kennedy wasn't staying silent. That evening on Fox News, Kennedy broke tradition. "If these documents are real," he said slowly, "then we've got rot in the basement. And if Graham's part of it, he'll need more than a press release to save himself." It was a direct hit, and it sent shockwaves through the party. Meanwhile, Patel's team received a new tip, an encrypted file sent from an overseas journalist working out of Brussels. Inside, more Petrex documents and one high-resolution image of a dinner meeting in Istanbul. Seated around the table were 3 Americans. One was a former national security advisor, another a military contractor under investigation in Afghanistan, and the third, a man labeled only as L. Graham. Kash stared at the image for a long time. "Istanbul," he muttered. They weren't selling weapons. He tapped the screen. They were buying silence. And in that moment, he understood. The scandal wasn't about one man's greed. It was about how foreign chaos was being turned into domestic power. And Lindsey Graham, once considered the Senate's moral compass, was about to become its deepest stain. The next day began with cold rain hammering the Capitol dome as if the city itself was preparing for what was coming. Cable news showed nothing else. Lindsey Graham's face looped beside words like treason, foreign funding, and Petrex conspiracy. But beneath the noise, something more dangerous had begun: internal panic. Inside room 227 of the Senate Ethics Committee, a rare closed-door emergency session had been called. Every phone had to be left outside. No aides, no cameras. Just 13 members and one man in the center, Kash Patel. He was calm, precise. Before him sat a thick black dossier labeled Revival Subset Domestic Ops. This wasn't a leak. This was evidence gathered legally. And it came from inside U.S. intelligence. This doesn't end at Graham, Patel said, voice low. This was systemic. Charts lit up the projector. Names, dates, and codes tied to briefings disguised as charity events in Eastern Europe. At least 6 senators had financial traces to offshore entities funneled through Phoenix Assets, the shell company tied to Graham. One transaction, a consulting payment labeled Istanbul Forum Preparation, coincided with a classified vote on American drone policy. Gasps echoed in the chamber. One senior senator slammed his fist on the table. Are you telling us members of this body helped steer foreign policy in exchange for private equity kickbacks? Kash looked straight at him. I'm telling you, someone sold America's foreign playbook to the highest bidder. Meanwhile, outside, Senator John Kennedy was live on MSNBC. This ain't some tabloid fluff, he said, his southern drawl slicing through the tension. We've got members of Congress involved in what may be the largest foreign influence scandal since Iran-Contra. And it didn't come from Moscow, it came from within. By midday, Graham's office had locked its doors. Staffers were shredding files. His former chief of staff, now in private consulting, had vanished from public view. But the real blow came just after 3 p.m., when Reuters dropped a bombshell. Graham tied to Ukrainian defense lobbying firm. Millions in contracts issued after Senate aid votes. In Charleston, South Carolina, protesters gathered. Traitor, one sign read. Ukraine's senator, not ours, read another. The anger was no longer digital, it was now in the streets. And still, Graham stayed silent. That night, Patel returned to CNN for an exclusive. He brought something new: footage. Where did this come from? Asked Aaron Moore, visibly nervous. From someone on the inside, Patel replied. The video was grainy, time-stamped 9 months earlier, and filmed secretly in a Kyiv hotel lounge. Lindsey Graham sat at a private table with Roman Vitsenko and a translator. They were laughing, toasting. On the table sat a briefcase and a contract folder. But what chilled the nation was what Graham said as he clinked his glass. As long as my vote counts, you'll have your corridor. Quietly, I guarantee it. Aaron Moore sat frozen. The newsroom behind her fell completely silent. This is real, she finally asked. Kash nodded. The corridor he refers to. That's the weapons shipping lane running through Odessa. It bypasses NATO inspection points. Billions have moved through it since. The feed cut to a stunned panel. One guest, a former CIA analyst, leaned in. That's not just unethical. That's national security compromise. If a foreign entity controlled that route with his help, it opens us up to retaliation from allies and adversaries. Inside the Pentagon, a conference call between Joint Chiefs and the NSC was hastily convened. J.D. Vance dialed in from the Eisenhower building. He didn't interrupt, he just listened. At one point, the Director of National Intelligence finally spoke. If Graham did this and the corridor's been running without oversight, it may have just lost credibility with 3 European allies. Back in South Carolina, a small group of Republican strategists met behind a shuttered office building to discuss the unthinkable Graham's removal. He's damaged goods, one said. The voters know it. The donors are spooked. Do you want to wait for Patel's part two? Another added. Because that man isn't done. They weren't wrong. At 11:42 p.m., Kash Patel tweeted, "Just 6 words. There's one more name." He knew. The post exploded across the internet. Speculation ran wild. Was it another senator? A general? Someone from the White House? But Kash refused to say more. What everyone did know, though, was that the next day he'd be testifying publicly. And this time, Lindsey Graham wouldn't be able to hide behind closed doors. The trial by media was over. The trial by the people was about to begin. The morning sun rose over Washington like a searchlight, glaring down on the city as if demanding answers. Outside the Capitol, a massive crowd had gathered. Protesters waved signs calling for resignations, reforms, and arrests. Inside the hearing, room was being prepared for what would be the most-watched congressional session since Watergate. Kash Patel sat calmly at the witness table, flanked by a thick folder of sealed documents and 2 armed federal marshals. He wasn't under arrest, but his life had changed. Since releasing the Kyiv footage, he had received dozens of threats. Yet his expression was steady, unreadable. He had one mission now: finish what he started. Cameras rolled as the session began. The committee chair banged the gavel. "We are here to investigate serious allegations of corruption, foreign influence, and national security compromise involving Senator Lindsey Graham. Our key witness, Mr. Kash Patel, will present new evidence. This hearing is public." Senator John Kennedy leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Patel," he said with slow gravity, "you've provided this body with evidence of one of the most shocking betrayals in modern American political history. But last night, you said one more name was involved. Is that true?" Kash nodded. The room tensed. "Yes, Senator. But before I reveal that name, you need to understand the full scope of what Operation Revival was." He clicked a remote. Screens lit up with maps, financial ledgers, and military shipping manifests. Operation Revival wasn't just a side deal for Senator Graham, he began. It was a multinational laundering and weapons corridor masked as humanitarian aid. It involved private defense contractors, intelligence assets, and foreign intermediaries. It was designed to route untraceable money and arms through Odessa to 5 key destinations. He pointed to the map. One of those destinations was a rogue port in Tripoli. Another went straight into disputed territory in eastern Georgia. Gasps echoed through the room. "And who funded this?" asked Senator Coates from California. Kash paused, then dropped the hammer. Senator Graham facilitated payments. But the man who greenlit the initial offshore shell structure was a sitting cabinet member, Secretary Philip Dwyer, Department of Energy. The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions. Phones lit up. On the live stream, millions of viewers watched in disbelief. Dwyer was a Trump appointee seen as a hawkish, patriotic figure. No one had imagined he would be the missing link. But Patel didn't flinch. He held up a letter with a classified header. "This document signed by Dwyer in 2020, approved. A discretionary energy partnership in Eastern Europe." But the partnership didn't exist. It was a front. And the funds went directly to Phoenix assets, then to the Revival pipeline. Meanwhile, in the White House Situation Room, J.D. Vance watched the broadcast in silence. Beside him sat National Security Advisor Elaine Grant and Defense Secretary Miller. Nobody spoke for a moment. The silence was heavier than war. Finally, Vance spoke. "If that corridor is real, and we've had unvetted weapons shipments passing through Libya and the Caucasus, we could be in violation of 3 major NATO treaties." Elaine nodded. "We need to lock this down now." Back at the hearing, the pressure mounted. One committee member, Senator Felix Brandt from Oregon, asked the question everyone feared. Mr. Patel, is it your belief that U.S. foreign policy was for sale? Kash looked at him with haunted eyes. It wasn't for sale. It was auctioned, and the highest bidder won. At that very moment, a new leak surfaced online mails between Graham and a European intelligence contact referencing clean corridors and high-yield returns. The media exploded again. MSNBC broke programming. Fox called it a deep state betrayal. Even CNN Live on the Air asked, "Is this the collapse of public trust in elected officials?" Outside, Lindsey Graham finally emerged from his townhouse, surrounded by aides. He didn't smile, he didn't wave. But as he approached the cameras, one reporter shouted the question, "Senator, did you sell weapons routes to foreign actors?" Graham stopped. For a long second, he stared at the crowd. Then, with a cold tone, he replied, "I did what I thought was right for America's influence overseas." It wasn't a denial. At night, Patel received a message and encrypted text from an anonymous number. It contained one line, "The name you didn't say knows you're next." Kash stared at the message. A chill ran down his spine. Because he knew exactly who it was referring to, and that name was still buried in the final file. Tomorrow, it would come out. And this time, even the president wouldn't be safe. Kash Patel barely slept that night. The encrypted message haunted him. "The name you didn't say knows you're next." He knew it wasn't an empty threat. Washington didn't deal in empty threats, not at this level. At dawn, he sat alone in a government safe house just outside the Capitol. A mug of untouched coffee sat beside him as he studied the final red folder. The label read, "Obsidian Tier 7 Clearance." Inside were the last classified links between Operation Revival and a figure so entrenched in national politics. Even Patel had hesitated. But there was no turning back now. Meanwhile, in the West Wing, President Trump sat in silence in the Oval Office watching Patel's testimony on loop. His legal counsel, Ty Randall, stood beside him. "Sir," Randall said carefully, "if Kash is right, Graham was only the surface." Trump didn't respond immediately. His gaze didn't blink. Then, softly, "You think Dwyer acted alone?" "No, and we both know Patel knows the name he didn't say. If he says it today, this town burns." Trump leaned back. "Let it burn. If I don't clean house now, it'll bury me before November." At Capitol Hill, a media frenzy erupted once again as Patel arrived for day 2 of the hearing. Reporters shouted questions, helicopters circled, and senators appeared visibly shaken. There were whispers that the name Kash was about to reveal would detonate the last wall between scandal and presidency. Inside, the chamber fell silent as the gavel sounded. "Mr. Patel," began Senator Kennedy, "yesterday you disclosed Operation Revival's financial pathways, Senator Graham's involvement, and Secretary Dwyer's authorization. But you mentioned there was one more name. Are you prepared to give it today?" Kash looked down at the folder. "I am," he said, his voice low but steady. "And I won't sugarcoat it. The individual I'm about to name had full operational knowledge. They greenlit covert diplomatic protection for Revival shipments and personally signed off on black budget assets used to suppress investigations." He paused, then looked directly into the camera. "The final name is Vice President J.D. Vance." The room erupted. Some senators stood, others gasped. Senator Coates dropped her pen. Shouts came from reporters outside. On television, anchors stuttered mid-sentence. Vance, watching from a secure room, didn't flinch. He turned to Defense Secretary Miller. "I wondered if he would do it," he said. "Now we know." But Patel wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, flipping through the folder. 2 months ago, an internal NSA probe flagged an anomaly. A signed directive rerouted over $50 million from an energy cooperation fund to a Latvian shell company named North Point Group, controlled by a trust linked to J.D. Vance's political PAC. Those funds then financed encrypted communications gear. For revival assets, that equipment has been traced to a conflict zone in Moldova, right, where we saw an unauthorized military exchange 2 weeks ago. The senators stared at him, speechless. And why would a sitting vice president do that? Asked Senator Brandt. Patel's eyes narrowed. Because revival wasn't just about money. It was about controlling the next global choke point, Tenergy. Corridors running through Eastern Europe. If you control the corridor, you control the next 20 years of leverage against Russia, the EU, and China. By now, social media had exploded. The words J.D. Vance exposed trended in 42 countries. In Ohio, his approval rating plummeted in real time. In Europe, diplomats scrambled to distance themselves from revival. Then came the final blow. Patel held up a flash drive. This contains surveillance footage from a private retreat in Davos. It shows Vance in a meeting with senior executives from Black Halo Logistics, the covert defense firm managing revival shipments. That footage was buried inside an NSA dead drop archive recovered last week. Senator Kennedy whispered to Coates, "That's a kill shot." Outside, the White House scrambled. Aides flooded the Situation Room. Elaine Grant looked pale. "We can't let this spin out of control," she said. "If J.D. Vance goes down, we might lose the administration." But it was already out of control. That evening, as protesters marched outside Congress and international headlines screamed of conspiracy at the highest level, J.D. Vance finally broke his silence. At 9:47 p.m., he posted on X, "I never imagined this war would be fought in back rooms and encrypted servers. I'll speak tomorrow. America deserves the full truth, even if it destroys me." The message got 32 million views in 1 hour. In a secured chamber, Kash Patel packed the red folder back into a steel case. An aide approached. "Are you sure you're ready for what happens next?" Kash nodded. "It's not about readiness, it's about duty." Because the final part wasn't just a scandal, it was a reckoning. And it hadn't even begun. The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the smoke-gray skies over Washington. D.C. National Guard vehicles quietly patrolled the Capitol perimeter, their engines humming beneath the weight of what was coming. Across the nation, schools delayed opening, trading floors hesitated, and families gathered around televisions like it was the eve of war. They weren't wrong. Vice President J.D. Vance was about to speak. Inside the Eisenhower Executive Office, building the atmosphere was eerily still. Vance stood in front of a bulletproof podium, 2 flags behind him, one American, the other muted in shadows. No music, no fanfare, just silence. He stared into the camera. "My name is J.D. Vance," he began, voice firm but visibly strained. "And today I won't be speaking as a vice president. I'll speak as a citizen who served this country and made mistakes that I now have to own." The room behind, the cameras tensed. "I will not deny the core of what Kash Patel revealed," Vance continued. "Yes, I was aware of Operation Revival. Yes, I believed its intent was noble to stabilize energy access in post-war Eastern Europe and shield America from manipulation by adversaries. But I see now what it became." He paused. "I never authorized the black budget deals. Never signed off on the weapons funneling. But I didn't stop it either. I turned away and I let ambition take over judgment." Gasps swept through newsrooms. On social media, the phrase "he admitted it" trended in 60 languages. In the basement of the Capitol, Kash Patel watched with still eyes. Senator John Kennedy sat beside him, chewing a toothpick, quietly muttering, "Damn." Then came the real surprise. "I'm resigning," Vance said. "Effective immediately. I will cooperate with every investigation. But before I go, I want to say something very clearly. I wasn't the architect. I wasn't the first. Operation Revival didn't start with me." He reached into his pocket and held up a sealed envelope. "This is a letter I wrote weeks ago. It contains the names of 3 individuals who were there before I was, including the one who built Revival from the ground up. It wasn't a politician. It was someone in plain sight hiding behind the flag and a corporation. In seconds, federal agents rushed to secure the document. Across the country, chaos had already ignited. In Ohio, Vance's supporters clashed with protesters. In Ukraine, the president demanded a U.S. explanation for the secret corridor. In Brussels, NATO leadership held an emergency meeting behind locked doors. And in a private hangar in Zurich, a man named Lucas Veller, former CEO of Black Halo Logistics, disappeared minutes before an arrest warrant could be executed. The storm was only deepening. Hours later, President Trump addressed the nation. Unlike his usual fiery demeanor, he appeared solemn. "We are a nation of laws," he said, "and no one, not even a vice president, is above them. I thank J.D. Vance for his courage today. And I assure the American people, this ends now. We will investigate everyone, including those in my own party." Behind him, Elaine Grant, his new chief of staff, gave a short nod. She had already ordered new cybersecurity filters across every executive branch office and froze 17 overseas accounts tied to Revival-linked shell firms. Meanwhile, Kash Patel walked down the steps of the Capitol building into a sea of cameras. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once, a signal that the job wasn't finished. That night, America didn't sleep. The headlines spoke of collapse, reform, awakening. But in the shadows, something else moved. A recovered hard drive taken from a storage locker in Munich contained a blueprint not just for Operation Revival, but for something darker, older, codename Glacier, initiated 2006, status active. And in a hidden surveillance room, inside Langley, a senior analyst turned to her director. "Sir, we may have just uncovered the real story. Revival wasn't the disease." She paused. It was a symptom. The director leaned forward, whispering the words that would define the next chapter of American history. Then, God help us all.